We've reached 1690 and the Declaration of Right, curbing the powers of the sovereign and giving absolute power in certain areas to Parliament, with the law being defined, basically, by the Church and the Ten Commandments as translated by Alfred the Great. Now that the basic framework and structures of government of Great Britain were in place, there's not really many more locations to show you of where things happened. All we need do now is to discuss the ways in which more and more people were enabled through the franchise, through having the vote, to have their voice heard. Now the places where decisions were made weren't battlefields any longer. They were the Houses of Parliament supported by Buckingham Palace and the churches and cathedrals throughout the United Kingdom, like this one, in my hometown. But we've already seen that once, so as a background to the discussion on the development of the franchise, we come here to Exeter. Let's go and look inside at this magnificent cathedral. Throughout the Middle Ages, the qualification to have a vote was to have at least £2 worth of property. That was never adjusted until Oliver Cromwell's time, when Parliament had a debate and redefined that amount as £200 worth of property. But no attention was paid to the nature of the constituency or the number of people required to elect a Member of Parliament. In some cases, it was as few as 3. And those places became known as rotten boroughs. The reason for the development of these rotten boroughs could be perfectly logical. As the sea ate away the land on the east coast of Britain, Dunwich, once the biggest port in the whole of England, fell into the sea, and even now the church bell can still be heard ringing underwater, so they say. But throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, it still elected 2 MPs to Parliament. Unscrupulous landowners and leaders of their communities exploited the rotten boroughs to make sure that their man was elected. And power in Parliament did not represent the people of the nation. It was clear that reform was needed. The existence of the rotten boroughs was well recognised by William Pitt the Elder, but his views for the need to address the situation fell on deaf ears in Parliament. William Pitt the Younger produced a reform bill in 1786, and that also failed. Then groups under Charles Grey, including the Hampden Clubs from John Hampden of Civil War fame, were set up to advocate reform and universal suffrage, together with equal-sized constituencies. But Parliament resisted, whilst the rotten boroughs with only 6 electors continued to send MPs to Parliament. The towns, as they were then, of Manchester and Birmingham, growing in importance, had no representation because they had no MPs at all in Parliament. The situation was obviously absurd. In 1819, the city of Birmingham held a meeting to discuss the whole issue. In August of the same year, Manchester held a similar meeting. On St. Peter's Fields, the crowd were ordered to disperse. They refused. The Manchester Yeomanry charged, killing several and injuring hundreds, in what has become known as the Peterloo Massacre. Parliament's response was to pass a Seditious Meetings Act, where meetings of more than 50 were prohibited without permission from the magistrate or sheriff. Nevertheless, gradually individual rotten boroughs were disenfranchised one by one, until the need for wholesale reform became overwhelming. Although there was still much resistance in the House of Lords, a start was made with the first Reform Act in March 1831, where many of the rotten boroughs were disenfranchised totally or significantly reduced. A series of Reform Acts were presented to Parliament, but it was clear that the House of Lords was determined to prevent progress, and such was the anger amongst the people of Britain that the public violence that erupted throughout the towns and cities mirrored that which had been seen in Paris in the French Revolution 40 years earlier. There was real fear amongst the ruling classes that they may be overthrown. Eventually the king agreed to create enough lords based on Charles Grey's nominations of those who would vote in favour of the Act, and the Great Reform Bill was finally passed on the 7th of June 1832. Other acts followed in 1867, 1884, 1911 and 1918, as well as Peterloo. The contribution of the suffragette movement, prompted by the extent to which women became a part of the hitherto male workforce during the First World War, leading eventually to the erection of this statue in Parliament Square, is a major part of the struggle and sacrifice in the development of the system of representation that we enjoy in the United Kingdom today. Until finally, in 1929, everyone from the age of 21, men and women, had a vote. Everybody's voice could be heard, and it was a responsibility of everyone to decide how they were going to vote, and relaxed discussions would take place after church on Sunday and in the pub in the evenings on weekdays, long before the regrettable interference of the mass media in the formation of opinion that we see today. Casting your vote became one of a number of generally accepted responsibilities by every citizen at general and local elections, after due and proper consideration of the realistic alternatives available.